of Dave Adams, city manager, be released to the public. Last Thursday, I watched the televised candidates forum sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. The following question was asked. In the last few years, we've had several new city managers, some staying 2 years or less. What do you think is the reason for the turnover? To prevent misrepresenting responses, I have provided Mr. Alders with the YouTube link so that the public can see what council members Rikel and Schwing answers were. Mr. Alders, can you play those responses?
Are extremely uninformed. We have a wonderful
here. This is a very dysfunctional, and I got to tell you, Gene's right. There's nobody in this county that really wants to come to work for Yorba Linda because of that.
Again, Mr. Knappenberger and Mr. Hernandez are extremely uninformed. We have a wonderful city manager, Steve Rudemetkin, who's worked for this city for over 30 years. He's so respected among the staff. People who work here are very happy. We're working with about 12 people less. We've gone through furloughs. We've had very difficult times beginning with the fire and working our way through all the issues involved in that. I can't say enough about our city manager and our city staff. And anyone who says other than that doesn't know anything. Flat out doesn't know. As far as other city managers, when I got here, we had an interim city manager who was filling in. We did hire a city manager for a year who just didn't feel this city was a fit for him, and I respect that. And thank goodness we got Steve Rudemetkin. And again, I love him, and everyone I know does. So I hope you all feel the same. I think you probably do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
It was a consultant hired for me.
And they got paid very well, looks like, to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Schwing?
Yes. We'll start with Mr. Kelly. Bill Kelly, who was a consultant hired for me, called a body shop as an interim. He considered staying. He was asked to stay, and then he really disliked one council member who's no longer in the council. If he had stayed, we would be paying him about $250,000 to $260,000 a year right now, which is $50,000 to $60,000 more. Actually, even more than that than our current city manager makes. We did a nationwide recruitment. We had 191 applicants. This is for a job my fellow council candidates up here said that nobody wanted. 191 applicants. Many of those from Orange County. We selected Dave Adams from San Juan Capistrano. Dave stayed 1 year, wanted to stay much longer, but decided to retire. Again, dislike of one council member no longer in the council. Steve Rudemetkin came out of retirement to take the job as city council member. He makes less than $200,000 a year. He refused to take a raise when he could have last year. I think he's the best city manager I've ever served with.
Thank you, Mr. Alders. Frankly, neither the response from Ms. Rikel nor the Mayor Schwing was truthful. I intend to expose the truth for the public benefit and let the public decide why the council members replied the way they did. First, let me say that I believe that there has been a pattern or practice of conduct by city council members towards the city managers and the city staff that has strained those relationships beyond what should be tolerated. It has negatively impacted staff performance and must be changed. Before I begin, I will say that my statement tonight is for ethical reasons. That is, it is my ethical responsibility to correct these misstatements. I will be extremely careful not to divulge closed session discussions, and I will repeat that. I will be extremely careful not to divulge closed session discussions. The following timeline is based on a written timeline I made of my actions in 2008, realizing that the facts may be called into question at some time in the future. Let me begin on March 8th, 2008. I was mayor that year and received a phone call at home from Craig Scott, an Orange County labor attorney. He told me that Ms. Letourneau wished to separate from her employment with the city of Yorba Linda. She was not willing to resign. After further discussion, I was informed she had grievances regarding her treatment during the last year or more. I asked for a meeting to discuss Letourneau's allegations. The meeting was held on Wednesday, March 12th in the conference room of City Hall. Present were Mr. Craig Scott, Tammy Letourneau, Sonia Carvalho, and me. That day, Mr. Scott had emailed Ms. Carvalho a demand letter. To my knowledge, only the four that were present at the meeting had seen the letter at that time. I will read from that letter. The conduct of certain members of the current city council has created a hostile work environment. Limited language, including flagrant violations of, that's flagrant, not fragrant, excuse me, violations of her civil rights. Some members of the city council have engaged in unlawful conduct, including disparaging and unlawful harassing Ms. Letourneau on the basis of her gender, asking Ms. Letourneau to engage in unethical conduct, which she has refused to do in order to cover up the council members' conflicts of interest, and threatening her and her continued employment by the city. Continuing later, if the city council does not terminate her employment at the closed session on March 18th, 2008 or earlier, authorize payment of the severance provided for in the city manager appointment agreement, authorize payment of the attorney fees she has incurred and will incur, and authorize the city attorney to draw up appropriate separation document. We have been instructed to file a formal complaint against the city and the responsible council members, and thereafter pursue Ms. Letourneau's rights in litigation. As a direct result of what I had learned at the Wednesday meeting, I called for a special meeting on Saturday, March 15th at 7:30 a.m. 2 items were on the closed session, and I will read from the minutes of that meeting. Item number 1, public employee dismissal. Government Code section goes on. 2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation. The meeting of the 15th was adjourned to another special meeting on March 18th, 1 hour ahead of the regularly scheduled meeting of that day. To further discuss the same agenda, I will now read the closed session report of March 18th. And this is the closed session report upon the City Council reconvening at 6:30 p.m. To deal with the budget hearing. City Attorney Carvalho reported there were 2 closed session items discussed this evening. One was a closed session item continued from Saturday, and the other was conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation and an additional case of anticipated litigation. As a result of the discussion of the first item, an additional employee item was added to the closed session agenda pertaining to public employee appointment, an acting interim city manager appointment. Mayor Winder reported that in closed session, the Yorba Linda City Council terminated Tammy Letourneau, who had served the city since October 5th, 2004. Ms. Letourneau's employment agreement provided that she was an at-will employee subject to termination without cause. Simply, the council desires a change in management leadership at this time. The separation was amenable, and she will be provided with severance and health benefits consistent with the terms of her employment agreement. He noted Ms. Letourneau as follows. He quoted Mrs. Letourneau as follows. She has enjoyed working for the city of Yorba Linda for the past 3 years, and that Yorba Linda is fortunate to have such a great staff who dedicates themselves to the community. My husband and I are looking forward to a new chapter in our lives. My timeline, I mentioned that earlier that I'd prepared. My timeline included the following. Speaking only for myself, I regretfully approved the council decision. I came to believe there was substance to her allegations, even if the allegations did not rise to the level that would support a potentially sizable judgment. The costs of litigation were likely to exceed her severance package. Continuing, regarding this announcement on the day of Ms. Letourneau's termination without cause, I wanted to tell the public precisely what I've said tonight. The majority of the council approved the generic statement, and I read it. On March 19th, Ms. Letourneau received a final check in the amount of in excess of $200,000. Her medical coverage by the city continued at city expense for one additional year. The council hired Mr. Kelly as the interim city manager. Mr. Kelly is a consulting professional today and unlikely to respond to questions about his service to the city of Yorba Linda. I will not speak further of him except to say that he served until Mr. Dave Adams began as city manager on July 20th, 2009. Mr. Adams was the city manager that was referred to in the tapes, if you'll recall. Continuing from my written comments. Mr. Dave Adams served from July 20th, 2009 to June 30th, 2010. Mr. Adams and I exchanged emails on June 30th. I had come to understand that Mr. Adams planned to resign. I wrote, I wanted to call you about what I understand is your item on the closed session agenda tonight, but allowing you your privacy is of greater concern to me. I will support whatever you are planning. Mr. Adams replied in part that day, this will be a very strange day for me. It's something I've never done before. I have asked for the closed session meeting to let the council know I am resigning at the end of July. And I'll reemphasize resigning. In fact, Mr. Adams attended both the closed session and the special budget meeting scheduled for June 30th at 5:30 and 6:30 respectively. To the best of my recollection, he told staff the next day of his immediate resignation, cleaned out his personal effects, and left City Hall for good. Mayor Anderson formally announced his resignation on July 6th, 2010, and Mr. Rudimetkin's contract to serve as city manager was approved July 20th, 2010. Mayor Schwing and Ms. Rikel reported on October 11th a very different set of circumstances that I recall having occurred. Realizing that the truth had not been revealed that evening, I contacted Mr. Adams and asked for his written waiver of right to privacy regarding his resignation. I will read the email I received last week from Mr. Adams. If I can find it. Excuse me, this isn't very easy for me. To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention recently that some comments were made about my tenure as city manager in Yorba Linda, which I feel need clarification. I served as city manager in July 2009 through July 2010. I resigned from that position 1 year later following a closed session meeting with the city council. I had called for the closed session to discuss my job performance because of open fighting and bitterness that existed between the council and the subsequent impact that was having on staff's ability to get the work done. During that session, I read a letter to the city council, which in part said, and separating from this, I remember like it was yesterday, he sat there with his head down reading from a prepared statement for quite some time. These are some of the quotes that I remember from that reading. And quote, I don't intend to be mean-spirited, but I want you to fully understand my reason for leaving at the end of July. I had been warned by some of your constituents, numerous other elected officials, and those in my profession to avoid Yorba Linda at all costs. I foolishly thought I could make an impact. I came here thinking I could fix things based upon council's promise to get along with each other and to allow me to do my job. That illusion was shattered on the first hour on the job when Mayor Mark Schwing and Mayor Pro Tem John Anderson spent 2 hours telling me I needed to reclassify and promote a certain staff member they liked in an effort to keep her there. I further read that, quote, I have seen you treat each other and our staff in ways I have never seen before in my 31 years of city government. Following John Anderson challenging my integrity once again during that meeting, I announced that I was resigning, even though I had no other position to go to, eventually leading to my retirement. The entire meeting was recorded, and I give my approval to having anyone listen to the recording if there is any doubt. The toxic relationship that existed between the council and how they felt about each other and the city staff drove several people away. I hope things have gotten better. I hope this clarifies the situation as I saw it in 2010. David Adams, former city manager, October 2012. Just for the record, I also received that from Mr. Adams' personal email account that over the years I've communicated with him periodically. Simply, ethics, accountability, and transparency require that the portion of the tape of Mr. Adams' resignation on the closed session of June 30th, 2010 be released to the public, and I so move. I will remind the council that Mr. Adams has given his permission to release the tape to the public, waiving any claim of privacy.
Is there a second to Mr. Winter's motion?
Second.
Discussion. Mrs. Rikel.
I want to let everyone know that the entire forum is available on YouTube if you'd like to look it up. And I appreciate Mr. Winder sharing the remarks that were made, which I stand by the way. It's Yorba Linda City Council Candidates Forum 2012. First of all, I was not here in March of 2008. I was elected in November of 2008. And at that time, Bill Kelly was our interim city manager, and I enjoyed working with him very much. I actually hoped that he would stay, but I understood that he was here for a brief period of time. He went through a very difficult period following our fire, and I appreciate everything he did. And then, yes, we did hire Dave Adams, who I also enjoyed working with, and I was very sorry that he decided to leave. In fact, I tried to talk him out of it. During the time he was here, his wife worked in Laguna Beach, and he would go home on weekends to spend time with her. He did purchase a condo here. And he made a public statement, which I assume he stood by, that he had decided to retire, and he did retire. Whatever conversations he had with Mr. Winder now or in the past, I was not privy to. And I was sorry to see him leave, but I was very happy, as I stated on the tape, that Mr. Rudimetkin came. The purpose of closed session action is to protect the city and the public. It came about that we recorded those tapes, or made those tapes, because of Measure Y, which I supported and I still support. However, the purpose of recording closed session tapes is not for political stunts, which is exactly what this is. And I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Well, I would comment, Mr. Winder, that you spent a good portion of your comments addressing the departure of Tammy Letourneau, which happened in March of 2008 from your data. And the members of the council at that time were yourself, Henry Wida, John Anderson, Jan Horton, and Alan Castellano. So there are three members sitting at this dais tonight that were not on the council at the time, had nothing to do with that. Although I was in the audience and heard your report that you alluded to. I've had many discussions in private with Dave Adams. And by the way, I misquoted the number of applicants. I said 191. We had, I think, 91. Excuse me. So I was wrong quoting off the top of my head the night of the forum. But we had nearly 100 applicants from across the United States, a number from Orange County, many assistant city managers, a number of city managers that wanted to apply to the city of Yorba Linda. And Dave and I had many conversations over the year he was here, and we had some after he left. And my recollection for him leaving, without discussing the closed session tape at the time, was he had a health concern of his own that was related to a member of his family, and I recall brother, but I'm not positive of that, who had a health problem. And Dave was concerned that it might be a hereditary thing in the family, and he wanted to lower the pressure and stresses on himself. As Mrs. Rikel said, he bought a condo. He lived here in Yorba Linda Monday through Thursday night and would go home to San Juan Capistrano to his wife on weekends. Not the best way in the world to live, frankly. I wouldn't want to do it, but Dave did it. Dave had some concerns with some of the council members, no doubt about that. But when he wanted to come to Yorba Linda, he wanted a clause in his contract that it was a minimum of 5 years. And at the time, our good attorneys, Sonia Cavallo from BB&K, couldn't figure out how to write it. So at the last minute, Dave said, I'm satisfied with the way it's written, which was basically the standard contract we have essentially today. It didn't have the 5-year thing in it. But I was disappointed to see Dave go. He came to us from San Juan Capistrano. He went to San Juan Capistrano from Atwater up in Northern California. He came with great recommendations of his council in San Juan Capistrano. He went back to them several months later for a 3 or 4 month temporary hitch while they were between city managers. Then he went back to retirement, and he's still retired today. That's the only comment I have. My recollections of conversations with Dave are very positive, and I will leave them private as they should be considered private. And we have a motion and a second, and public comment. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Nelson.
So we find ourselves in an interesting situation that we have permission from the person involved to have tape released about something that people said happened that he say didn't happen that way. I would be really wondering why you wouldn't approve this. If you stand by what you said or did, and the tape proves otherwise, and you know that, you're going to get caught. If you don't remember, then the tape should remind you. Either way, it's about transparency, which some of you spend a lot of time talking about. So here's a time to put it into action. I cannot believe you wouldn't approve that portion, specifically that portion about what he said on that meeting. You don't let that go through, you are not being transparent. And I hope the voters realize that.
Ms. Sauer.
I'm sorry, I was a bit late when I came. Why is Mr. Anderson not here? Is that number 3? It would have been. Now it fails because it's 2-2, and Mr. Anderson didn't want to get involved.
I can only tell you that Mr. Anderson had a migraine headache and wouldn't be here today. Mrs. Horton.
Thank you, and I would agree with Mrs. Sowers. It's a very convenient headache. I'm in a unique position because I was there for all 3 of these city managers and served on the council, and so I also will be very careful not to disclose closed session items, but I too give my permission for that tape to be released since my voice is on there. So having that said, I am not against that, so go ahead and let it go. I think the importance of the Letourneau discussion is that it shows a pattern of behavior. And Mr. Anderson was on that council, and I personally witnessed, and actually was the victim of, but I personally witnessed him verbally abusing Mrs. Letourneau to the point where I was shocked And I really felt she had a strong case for a harassment suit. And when he attacked me, and I turned in my complaint to you, Mr. Schwing, because you were the mayor at that time, because you also bypassed me for mayor, you kind of just shoved it off to him, and he had his funny little response, which fabricated, by the way. But anyway, you didn't do anything about the abusive behavior as mayor, which is the flaw in that ethics ordinance, by the way. So Mr. Kelly comes through, and I think it was on your campaign interview on this last chamber thing that you mentioned that Mr. Kelly and Mr. Adams both resigned. Maybe it was just Mr. Kelly. He didn't want to stay because he disliked one of the council members that's not here anymore. Well, it's funny because I'm trying to think of who was on, and it was me, but yet Mr. Kelly was encouraging me and helping me with my campaign. So you have to wonder, like, who was it? I don't know. Mr. Adams, I met Mr. Adams' brother. Mr. Adams' brother used to live in the condo up here, and he worked in a mortuary, and maybe he still does, I'm not sure. Very nice gentleman. But Mr. Adams was very frustrated by what was going on between the council. And there's no question that Mr. Anderson and I did not get along pretty much the entire time that we were on together. And an example, and I think one of the straws that broke the camel's back was Mr. Anderson liked to micromanage, and he still does like to micromanage every single thing. And he leads you two by the nose, by the way. But the reality is that here it is. You know, we have this deal where when we would ask for staff reports or something extra to back up our decisions, we just asked the city clerk, she'd make us copies, we would get it. And Mr. Anderson thought that we should be paying for that. So we discussed it as a council, and we're going to be paying for this. Well, it was at the time that you guys were trying to make a big deal out of the FPPC thing I was going through on the strawberry field. And Mr. Anderson asked the city attorney to bring in all the documents that she had worked on for me on the FPPC and wanted them all copied. And Mr. Adams got frustrated and said, you know, you can't have these. This is city attorney stuff. And Mr. Anderson got into a big knockdown, drag down with Mr. Adams, so finally Mr. Adams just gave it to him without cost, by the way. They made him copies without cost, even though the rest of us were paying. And that was pretty much when Adams was just decided, you know what, there was no winning with you guys. You guys are a solid block of 3. Whatever he said, whatever Anderson said went, and he couldn't fight it any longer. So without disclosing what happened in closed session, I'm just telling you, you have my permission to let that tape go. It would be very non-transparent for you not to let it be heard in public. No lie that Anderson and I didn't get along. There's no lie that I don't like either one of you two either. But the reality is you guys have been abusive. That is not the only staff members that left. And there's another staff member that could have filed a harassment suit because of the behavior that you, Mr. Schwing, used against one of them. So I would be careful, but I would actually ask you to please let that tape come public. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Mrs. Burke.
Debbie Burks. I just want to say that the truth is never a political stunt. The truth is what we need. It was interesting to hear Mr. Winder read a memo from the man himself, Dave Adams, and then yet to hear the rebuttals were as if that man never said that. That seems like there's such a disconnect there. I think the best thing for all would be, let's just admit what happened and let's move on. And let's in the future be more careful about how we answer questions. Let's tell the truth, even when it's not very comfortable or we don't look so great. But to continue this charade of he left because he wanted to retire or his brother was ill, you know, we all know that's not what happened. And I know some lower level city employees, and I remember them telling me that when Mr. Adams first started, that he was startled. He had shared this with some of the employees. He was startled by the way the council treated the staff and their attitude towards the employees. So let's be transparent. We've talked a lot about transparency. You've campaigned on transparency. Let's put your actions to meet your words. This is very important. Please vote yes.
Ms. Schultz.
Julia Schultz. I agree with all the previous speakers. I would really like to know what happened because you probably know, I know you were in one of the meetings, we worked with Dave Adams in discussing an art center. He was a delight to work with. But as we continued to talk with him, I felt frustration from him, and I was sensing concern that he wasn't going to stick around. And we were begging him, please don't leave, because he was such a delight to work with. I know the staff liked working with him. And he just couldn't stay. I witnessed after a meeting where actually you were in the meeting, Mr. Schwing, where we were discussing the Art Center and we thought we had come to an agreement. The very next night was a council meeting and it was a flip, a 180-degree flip. And Mr. Adams had his pencil, he threw it down and said, unbelievable. So I sensed his frustration. I was afraid he was going to leave, and he did. So I, as a citizen, would like to know transparency is a huge issue. And you guys keep going on and on about the transparency. As has been said, put your money where your mouth is. I also find it very interesting that Mr. Anderson is not here tonight. It seems very convenient because he never misses council meetings. He's only missed one, that I recall. So he doesn't want to have the third vote. So, gosh, all three of you are voting against transparency. Come on, do the right thing, guys. Please. Thanks.
See you, Mr. Ricochi.
The sky is falling.
Let's be professional, please.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to add some music to the dog and pony show that's going on tonight. This is electioneering at its best. But, you know, I guess that's going to be the crowning moment or the legacy that will be left behind by Mr. Winder. Not surprised. Anyway, I get the game here. You don't need to follow this kind of game and this kind of BS. Okay. The bottom line is that these are confidential conversations that went on, and tons of this stuff is hearsay. I'm dying to hear what Mr. City Attorney has to say about this. Whether or not these things have to be released, can be released in these conversations, because that's really the bottom line here. Now, if Mr. Adams says, do we have something in writing from Mr. Adams that says that he's released it, or we just have Mr. Winder's word? So I'm just curious here, because I mean I'm really trying to find the smoking gun. We spent 80% of the conversation on Tammy Letourneau, again, as Councilman Schwing referred. You guys weren't even on the council. Okay? Now, but here's the thing. We're talking about all this stuff that went on in the past, and yes, it's an answer to the question, and we're picking what I call fly poop out of pepper to try to find a little nugget so we can nail these guys, right? But the reality is there's nothing. There's nothing. And the thing is, they're making a big mountain out of a molehill, and the reality is this. Is the city staff happy now? Is the city council and is the city staff and the city management happy, and do they all get along? Are we moving along at a good pace? Not about what happened last year or 2 years ago or when Ms. Letourneau was here. I mean, heck, why don't we talk about Art Simonian while we're at it? Oh, that's right. He contributed to the campaigns along with the former city engineer. Do I see a pattern here? I do. This is the biggest election stunt I've seen, and I thought I staged many. This is great. This is an embarrassment, and you should be ashamed, Mr. Winder.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening again. One of the prior speakers noted that truth is never a political stunt, but timed correctly, of course it is. My initial question before Councilman Winder's presentation was simply, why now, 27 months later? Following the presentation, I don't know that I have a specific opinion about whether or not the tape should be released, but I think it's interesting that there is a person sitting in this room, in the audience, in favor of release of the tape, who I'm fairly certain would not be in favor of release of her private conversations, who came up to me personally in a council meeting 3 or 4 meetings ago and called me an idiot and a moron, having never met me. I think there are certain things that are said in private that people expect to stay in private, and I do not think it serves any of the people who are part of that conversation. I do not think it serves the public interest to air dirty laundry for the sake of a political stunt, which is what this feels like. If there's a legitimate issue related to the resignation of David Adams, then it seems like it should have been brought up sometime in the prior 2 years, not days before an election. Thank you.
Ms. Stevens.
Nancy Stevens, my sincere apologies to my eldest daughter, Paige. I might not remain a lady. I do believe this tape should be released, and some of what's going on is poppycock.
Anybody else?
Hello, Council. Tony D'Amico. I know Bill Kelly. We both graduated from Don Bosco Technical High School in Rosemead, California. And I can attest to what Ms. Rikel and Mr. Schwing say about him is absolutely true. As far as Mr. Adams go, I have a good friend who I've known for over 40 years. He was a city councilman at one time, and he's involved with the city, and he made a statement to me that they should never have hired Mr. Adams because he had 29 years of retirement, of city experience and everything, and he needed one more year to retire, and he came to Yorba Linda to retire at a higher pay. So, that makes sense to me. Hey, let's spend my last year making more money and retire at a higher deal. Now, it didn't work out, so he just left. So why not? Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening again, Greg Schultz. It seems we're in a dilemma again. Truth will set you free. You only have fear. And I don't see a problem of not letting the truth come out. It will set everything open, and it will close the discussion on everything. It'll be plain and simple. Whether some people think it's political, some people don't. The fact is, we have one side saying one thing, another side saying something else. We're in a debate about it. We have a document, a recording that will clarify the whole thing. Truth will set you free.
Anyone else? Mrs. Rikel.
I call for the question.
Please vote. Question has been called.
Is the chair going to recognize me?
No.
You afraid of what I have to say?
No, but you don't want to hear what I have to say either.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I call for the question.
I will not tolerate outbursts from anybody in the audience. You've been fair warned. The next time somebody speaks out of turn without being in that podium, you'll be escorted out.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Mr. Winder.
Members of the public ask questions that I should respond to, if nothing else.
Mr. Mayor, this is nothing but a political stunt. I call for the question.
Mr. Attorney, what's Robert's rules?
Call for the question was called. Mayor's discretion. Usually, though, when questions are asked, a person does get to respond to questions from the established crowd. So I would recommend that if there are questions, Mr. Winder be allowed to answer them.
Go ahead, Mr. Winder.
Thank you, sir. To the speaker that asked why now, I believe I prefaced all of my statements today that I was listening to the televised council forum last Thursday. None of this had been aired publicly to my knowledge before. I heard for the first time it being aired public by two of the council members, and I believe that it was a falsehood. I've read from Mr. what Mr. Adams reports were what he read the night of the event. Interestingly enough, I haven't heard either of these council members deny that these statements were not made. Second, and evidence about Mr. Adams' intent to stay here for a long time. He bought a townhome here, which he still owns, by the way. Let me see. Mr. Rudemecken, I need to call upon you if I can. As I recall the events, your former superintendent of the Parks and Recs department was one of the people that availed herself of an early retirement. And we, what do you remember the date that we hired you to be the interim recreation director after Ms. Lido left the city's employment?
It was the, Mr. Mayor, members of council, it was the end of October
2009.
2009. Mm-hmm.
And how long did you, in that capacity, did you work for Mr. Adams then?
From that point until he left in July of 2010.
You got to know him pretty well?
Of course.
Okay, of course. Question was asked by the public: is the city staff happy? Are you happy? Is the city staff happy?
You know, with all due respect to Mr. Winder, I don't want to put the staff in the middle of an argument or a discussion or a disagreement between the council members.
Okay. For the record, Mr. Schwing, do you deny the quotes that I made? They were not read in your presence?
I'm not denying anything, Mr. Winder, at this point.
And Ms. Rikel?
I have no obligation to answer your questions. This is a political stunt, and I will not be a part of it, Mr. Winder. This
All right,
is
I'll
absolutely unbelievable.
Thank you. I'll read one final thing. It's from the city's ordinance. In fact, it's from the ordinance number 2010-940. It's the ethics ordinance of the city of Yorba Linda that this council repeatedly has been so proud of. Section 2.44.090, tape recording of all closed session meetings of the City Council. The Brown Act authorizes the City Council to direct that the closed session discussions of the City Council be recorded and maintained by a designated person. The City Manager is hereby directed to provide for the audio taping of all closed session meetings of the City Council, and the Mayor shall cause such audio tapes to be delivered to the City Clerk. The audio tape shall be maintained by the City Clerk in sealed envelopes and shall remain at all times in a secure location accessible only to the City Clerk. And then I would emphasize, the closed session audio tapes shall not be a public record and shall only be accessed in accordance with the provisions of the Brown Act in connection with an official investigation or review as provided for in the Brown Act. And then the last part, or by a vote of at least 3 members of the City Council only when such release is permitted by law. That wasn't my ordinance. That was the ordinance that was proposed by Mr. Anderson and Ms. Rikel and Mr. Schwing. It appears the only reason that they required tapes of that is so that disputes like this about what happened in a closed session, the truth could be determined what really happened. And now this is the first time that I'm aware of that they won't apply their own ordinance. And I guess one last question of the city attorney, Mr. Litvin. Is there any operation of law that you're aware of that would prohibit the council from taking this action tonight, that is releasing the tapes?
No, even though I will admit I'm generally predisposed to not releasing Brown Act stuff, but there is no prohibition against it because Mr. Adams has consented.
Well, then I think it's pretty clear to me. It's their own ordinance. We have a dispute. I didn't start it. It was started last Thursday by the comments that were made by Ms. Rikel and Mayor Schwing, and I'm ready to vote.
The gentleman asked the question, why now? Very simple. 21 days before the election. Is there any legal requirement to release these tapes? Absolutely not. It's an electioneering stunt, and my vote will be accordingly. I also had many private conversations with Mr. Adams in the course of the year he was here. I will not divulge those to anybody. They were private between Mr. Adams and I, as well they should be. Please vote.
The tie vote.
Motion fails.
Right. Thank you.
All right.